con un ojo pelado y el otro también. Trabajando, produciendo, construyendo, funcionando todo siempre. Y preparados para partirle los dientes al imperio norteamericano si hiciera falta desde la patria de Bolívar.
And there's quite an interesting choice of phrase. He's prepared to break the teeth of the North American empire if necessary, because there are three variables that you just don't know if you're going into any conflict. And I'm not saying this will be a war. So the first variable is, will they fight? Will the Venezuelans fight? The second one is, how well will they fight or defend? And the third one is, for how long will they fight or defend? And to look at that, you need to look at the capabilities of the Venezuelans and where they might do damage to the Americans should anything occur. We know in the last few weeks that Maduro has reached out to, the authoritarian axis, as it were, and has tried to get sort of additional radars from China, Iran, and Russia. And we know that over the last 20 years, there have been something like $4 billion worth of defense agreements between Russia and Venezuela. So the three key capabilities, really, though, within that we're looking at are, firstly, there are supposedly a number of anti-ship missiles that the Venezuelans have, both Iranian and Chinese, of which the most predominant ones that we would talk about are the Chinese C-802 and the Iranian Nazir. That could be potentially a ship killer, but then you'd have this sword versus shield in terms of, is the electronic warfare capability of the Americans so great that it will negate the homing and guidance facilities of the anti-ship missiles. The second capability would be a sort of modeling on the Iranian fast attack craft, the IRGC swarms. Could there be a swarm of small boats going towards any American shipping? And the third one is they've got fairly significant drone capabilities, including the Shahed 136, which we've seen operated in Russia but that's the Iranian drone, both predominant or evident in the drone swarms over Ukraine, and potentially could be over the US fleet. So none of this is a done deal that it would be painless for the Americans. And that's why they've got to be very careful in how they do this, and why there might be strategic hesitancy from the Americans in going further in escalatory terms into the involvement in land targets. Now, that doesn't mean they won't try and take on land targets. I don't think it means, with the forces that are arrayed from the Americans, that we're going to have an overt invasion for the Americans. I just don't see enough forces to do that. You could use forces for raids on specific objectives, things that they think are labs and infrastructure, but you can do that by offset methods these days by using Tomahawk missiles, for example, and the American targeting is the most exotic in the world. So you don't really need to put raiding parties on the ground if you can guarantee destruction from offset weapons. We really see the limits of Russian power when other countries have called upon them to help. So this summer, for example, the Iranians would have really liked the Russian assistance when the Israelis were doing things to them. They did nothing. Assad wanted Russian assistance a year ago. They did nothing. So the limits of Russian power are being shown to be evident this year. And again, I think there would be strategic hesitancy from China in giving overt support to Venezuela. They might give sort of moral support, but nothing more than that. In terms of a wider war, you have to be careful in how we use the nomenclature of these things. The use of the term war is an act of war is a political phrase. It is not a legal phrase. In terms of how that plays out in the UN, the UN only authorizes war in two circumstances. Firstly, when it's authorized by a UN Security Council resolution, or secondly, under Article 51 in an act of self-defense. That could be an interesting one because obviously in terms of the new US national security strategy, they've emphasized once more that their predominant number one goal is a dominance of the Western Hemisphere. So again, if you're Mexico or Canada as the 51st state, or Greenland, you'd be slightly worried. But you could flip that on its head, what I've just said, and it could be actually Venezuela that went to the UN Security Council and said that Article 51 should be invoked in support of Venezuela. Now, do America care about that? No, I don't think they do. We're in an age when Trumpian politics means that the niceties of international law and international relations don't seem to pertain. And we've kind of seen that recently with all the fog of war about did two people who were alive after an initial strike in September then be taken out in contravention of the laws of war, i.e. they were no longer a threat. But I don't think any of those nuances really are cared about by the Secretary of War in America or by Trump at the moment. In those various ways that you can escalate. So when I talked about the domains, I talked about land, sea and air as the three predominant ones. We've seen the activity with the tanker in the last 24 hours in the sea domain alongside the small boats. So the two other things to look for is firstly, if there's any change in the land domain, do they do any strikes on land? And secondly, how are they doing those strikes? Is the use of air power going to be one of the key conditions for the Americans? Again, America has the most exotic air power in the world. But again, if you're going to use air power significantly to attack land targets, you normally have what the Americans call phase zero operations, when you would get rid of all the Venezuelan radars so that you blind them, so you've got freedom of action. In the same way that the Americans have sea control at the moment, they would want to establish air dominance or air supremacy. And that is normally a prerequisite. So it's looking at what they do in those other two domains, which will give you an indication of where this is going in the next few weeks.